The Hypocrisy Experiment, When Labor Becomes a Crime, the Soldier Edition. If This Job Were Illegal, the Soldier's Edition. There are very few professions where the possibility of injury or death is built directly into the job. Military service is one of them. Soldiers are trained to endure extreme physical strain, operate in dangerous environments, and face the real possibility of losing their lives. Their bodies are the central instrument of the work, and risk is not incidental, it is fundamental. And yet, when we talk about soldiers, especially women in the military, the framing is remarkably consistent. Strength, sacrifice, service. Women have served in the U.S. military since the Revolutionary War, and today they constitute a vital part of the armed forces, serving in active duty, the reserve, and the National Guard. Women who enlist are often celebrated for breaking barriers, for claiming space in a historically male-dominated institution, for proving that they belong in roles once denied to them. Now contrast that with how we talk about women in sex work. When women enter military service, even under economic pressure, we call it courage. When women enter sex work under similar pressures, we call it coercion. When women risk their bodies in combat, we call it sacrifice. When women risk their bodies in sexual labor, we call it exploitation. When institutions profit from women's labor in the military, it is framed as national defense. When individuals profit from sexual labor, it is framed as abuse. The work may be different, but the underlying structure is not as different as we pretend. Here's how we know it's dangerous. The dangers of military service are not speculative. They are systematically recorded, studied, and publicly documented across multiple institutions. The Department of Defense tracks fatalities, training accidents, equipment failures, and injuries. Medical research documents long-term impacts, traumatic brain injuries, PTSD, chronic illness, and toxic exposure. These are not rare outcomes. They are expected job risks. Soldiers train with live ammunition, explosives, armored vehicles, and aircraft. They operate in unstable, unpredictable environments. Even outside combat zones, training itself carries serious risk. And yet, we do not respond to this danger by asking whether soldiers should be rescued from their work. Two industries built on the body. Military service is often framed as duty or identity, but structurally, it is also contract labor. People enlist under agreements that define pay, benefits, and working conditions. Institutions recruit, train, and deploy them. This is not unique. Like sex work, military labor involves the use of the body in exchange for compensation, shaped by systems of demand, opportunity, and constraint. In both cases, people enter for complex reasons: economic survival, mobility, lack of alternatives, or pursuit of stability. But only one of these forms of labor is routinely stripped of legitimacy: risk, consent, and the double standard. In most industries, risk does not cancel consent. Construction workers, firefighters, and soldiers all face danger, and the response is not to question whether they can choose the work. The response is to improve conditions, strengthen protections, and build support systems. Women in the military are rarely told they are incapable of consenting to risk. Their decisions are respected, even when those decisions involve life-threatening conditions. Women in sex work are treated differently. The same factors, economic pressure, limited options, institutional power, are interpreted not as context, but as proof that consent is impossible. The worker is redefined, not as a decision-maker navigating constraints, but as someone acted upon. The distinction is not about risk, it is about which kinds of labor society is willing to recognize as legitimate. If dangerous work equals exploitation, if we apply the logic used against sex work to military labor, the conclusion becomes unavoidable. Soldiers risk their bodies for pay, benefits, or opportunity. Many enlist under economic pressure. Their labor is organized and directed by powerful institutions that determine where they go and what they do. Under that framework, military service becomes inherently exploitative. And if the work itself is exploitative, the policy response would not be to improve it, but to eliminate it. What criminalization would look like. Imagine a fully criminalized model of military labor. Soldiers could be arrested for engaging in dangerous work. Recruiters could be prosecuted for targeting economically vulnerable populations. Military infrastructure could be framed as organized exploitation. On paper, this would be about protection. In practice, it would produce the same outcomes we see in any criminalized labor market. The work would continue, but with less oversight, less safety, and fewer protections. Injuries would go unreported. Accountability would weaken. Systems designed to reduce harm would become inaccessible. The danger would remain. Only the protections would disappear. The punish the system model. Under a Nordic-style framework, soldiers themselves would not be criminalized, but the systems around them would. Recruiters, command structures, and institutions would face prosecution. The stated goal would be to protect the worker by targeting the system. But a system that cannot operate openly cannot provide safety. Training, coordination, oversight, and long-term care depend on infrastructure. When that infrastructure is criminalized, it does not disappear. It destabilizes. And here is where the comparison becomes especially clear. In sex work, safety tools, screening systems, communication methods, even condoms are often treated as evidence of wrongdoing. The very things that reduce harm become liabilities. Imagine applying that logic to the military. Protective gear becomes suspicious. Coordination becomes conspiracy. Training becomes facilitation. Safety itself becomes incriminating. The policy lesson. This is where the double standard sharpens into focus. When women risk their bodies in the military, we invest in making the work safer. We expand their access. We celebrate their participation. When women risk their bodies in sex work, we question their judgment. We criminalize their environment. We restrict their options. The difference is not the presence of risk. It is the presence of legitimacy. If dangerous work justified prohibition, the military would not exist. Instead, we accept a different principle. When work is risky, workers deserve more protection, not less, which raises a harder question than the one we usually ask. Why do we trust women to consent to risk when that risk serves the state, but deny that same capacity when it serves their own survival? At Swap Behind Bars, we believe that people deserve the same rights, safety, and dignity at work regardless of the job they do. Our organization is a national network led by current and former sex workers that provides support, advocacy, and resources for people impacted by the criminalization of the sex trade. We created this series as a thought experiment to examine the logic often used to justify criminalizing sex work. By applying those same arguments to other forms of labor, we hope readers can see more clearly how criminalization actually works in practice. History shows that arresting workers does not eliminate risk, exploitation, or poverty. It simply pushes people further from safety and support. Our goal is not to trivialize other professions, but to invite a deeper conversation about labor, autonomy, and what real worker protection actually looks like.